going on, everybody? Joe Menza here, and I thought I'd continue a little bit on our last video that I put up was about a lot of beginner stuff. So I thought I'd do a little bit more, elaborate a little bit more on that. One of my subscribers had asked in the comment section, or at least commented, about water content on the brush. So that's the big question here, and that's the question that a lot of people seem to have, is how much water is on the brush versus the paper. So let me show you something here. Here's the canteen I use. Here's the brush. Okay, you can see water dripping off right now. This is as much water as the Hake can handle. Now on this particular canteen, it's just right, because when you rub the brush against the lip, just enough water comes off, and this is how much water is actually on the brush. So let me see if I can turn this. If I squeeze it, you can see it's still pretty wet, but it's not that wet. If I dip it in, I don't do anything, so there's this much water running off. If I rub it against the lip, now I have just a saturated amount on the brush, and it's not enough to make it actually run off, but there's still a lot of water on here. Now, the other way that we control the brush is we use a cloth. I have one hanging on the side of my easel. So I have this brush here, and what I do is I pat it when I want to get it drier. So if I don't want as much water on the brush, I will actually dab it like so. And if I just want a full, like if I'm doing my coating, so for instance, let's say I'm doing the paper here, I will wet the brush down, and I might just dab a little on the lip, but I will have a full brush of water. So I'll do my full 3 coatings just to make sure that there's enough water. 2 is probably good enough, but in case you miss any spots, you can dip it in, and you can do 3 full coatings and just let the water cascade down the paper. So now you have a really full wet sheet. So now we're gonna go to painting. Now we're gonna dip in the water, and what I'll do is I'll dab the brush on my towel, and I'll dab off some of the excess, and then I'll go to my first color, which is raw sienna, and I'll put in. Now you're gonna have to do a lot of paintings to really get it for yourself. This isn't something like you're gonna learn from one video and then you know exactly how much to put on there. It's just not gonna work that way. You gotta do it many paintings to really get it down. Now at this point, once I've done an initial wash, I'm gonna wash my brush off into my water jug, and then I'm gonna actually brush it off on the edge and then dab it again. So now I've probably got a wet brush, but it's not saturated and it's not full. So then we're gonna dip into our blue. I'll just do a quick made up scene, and you can see how much water is actually on the brush. Now, there's enough water here for it to come down, but again, it's not something that you're gonna get just by watching one single video. I can explain it the best I can as to how much water I think is on the brush, but until you start putting brush to paper, you're not going to actually get a really good idea until you actually get in there with the brush and do it yourself a few times. It's gonna take a few times. Now, I recommend actually running your board flat. I do it in an upright position because I've gotten used to it that way. But if you don't want the water to cascade, do it on a flat surface or just slightly elevated. So, as you get down toward the foreground of what you're doing, as you get down to the bottom here, you're probably going to use less and less water. As things become darker and more neat paint, you're going to use less and less. For a sky, you're going to use a lot of water because you want things to sort of blend. Now, if you're doing a background, like let's say you want to do some trees in the background here, well, you're going to use a light color and you're going to use more water on the brush. And so you're going to have maybe a row of trees here. So you're going to use less water. And then as you want to bring more things into the foreground, like I'll get some neutral tint on here. And see, now we have a little bit more paint. There's still a lot of water, so it blends, because this technique is what they call wet and wet, alla prima, where you're actually doing wet paint into wet paint, and it delivers some neat effects. So now we have our little row of bushes. We can probably take that same, let's get some more yellow on here. Now we have less water on the brush, so we can do a little bit of dry brushing techniques. And again, you can brush it off on your towel. You can squeeze it off with your fingers. And that will give us the ability to dry brush and leave more white sparkles on the paper and so forth. So now you can see this top part is drying. It's not cascading so much, and we have this down lower thing here. This is just a made up scene. Now I'm really not even dipping into the water so much. I'm just getting more paint off of here and relying on what's on the brush, because now that I'm down toward the bottom, I want stronger and stronger colors so that I can, you want the foreground to be a little darker so that it looks more three-dimensional. So this looks further back, this looks closer, and then finally the closest section is what you have on the bottom. And then when I do trees now, I still haven't dipped it back in the jug because these brushes, they hold so much water. That's where people get into trouble with these brushes, is they hold so much water. You know, mops hold a lot of water too, but these hold a ton of water. And then the other thing is you're so used to the mops with a fine point, you're not used to such a, you know, this is like a brush you'd paint your house with, you know, but the thing of it is, it keeps you from doing the small details. So you get reliant on, you know, when my dad said when he was in school, he used to play basketball, and they didn't have a basketball hoop. This is probably, you know, 50 years ago. They didn't have a basketball hoop, so they took the cushion out of a chair, a round chair, and they hung it on their garage. Now that hoop was probably smaller than a regulation size basketball hoop. So they got to be pretty good shooting in such a smaller cylinder or a smaller ring that when they got to the actual court, it made, you know, it was like it taught them to shoot for something smaller. Same thing with this brush. It's going to teach you. And then when you go to details, you're so used to painting with such a big brush, you'll get really good at it over time, you know. And then when you get back to using, you know, like say a smaller brush, now you're going into details. Like, I don't really like the detail work. I like using the large brush, and, you know, it's kind of like the Rorschach ink blot test. You know, you paint big objects, and then you see kind of what the mind makes them look like. And that's what you're doing with that brush. Don't try to do details with that. You're just kind of slapping in the shapes. You want to focus on the shape, you know, like this is a triangle, this is, you know, just a straight, maybe letter I, letter L, mountain is an M. You know, you're just going to focus on more or less the shapes. Don't try to paint a mountain. Try to paint what your mind sees as a mountain shape-wise. If you get the shape right, like a cloud, it's a fluffy, sort of ambiguous shape. If you made a square cloud, the mind would call that into question. In this case, you want to get these shapes. This, what I've painted here, I didn't paint exactly what I was going for. I painted the shape. And that's kind of the idea behind Impressionism. It's a quick impression. Just running this card down here to take a little bit of light and create a little bit of bark. Immediately, as soon as the eye sees that, it says, hey, what I'm looking at is actually real. And as far as like this kind of a brush now, you know, if you've worked with smaller brushes and you're trying to do detail or branches or stuff, you try to get this as much water on here as possible so you don't run out. The Hake is sort of the opposite thing. You know, you got to get used to how much you're going to have on there. You don't want to give up on it, because the Hake can be good. I mean, at the very least, for washes or big washes on your paper, and you go back to the mop. I don't know how some people do big washes with a mop. I've done it, and I've gone back to the Hake because it's just so much easier at this point. But then again, I've painted with almost nothing but the Hake for what, two straight years? Like these hockey players or something, they sleep with their stick, sleep with the ball as part of your training. It has to become an extension of your arm. If you've ever taken, I've taken martial arts when I was younger, and they always say if you work with a weapon, people that do that, they're not proficient even in their hands, and they're actually going to use a weapon. So it has to become a natural extension of your body to have done this, to where you know exactly what it's going to do. So, you know, a lot of these painters that come on, TV painters and stuff, they tell you to practice, but they don't tell you, otherwise you'd give up if I said it's going to take you 300 paintings to get to this point. You would say, nah, I can't, I don't have the time for that. Well, it's not going to take you 300 to start having fun and get some decent results right off the bat. That's why I'm trying to show you some of the things that were a mystery to me when I started. And if you could just do these basic things, well, at least you can have fun with it. I think painting is a great thing. It's a great stress reliever. And instead of looking down at your phone 24/7 and just zoning out, to sit down and do this as a hobby, I don't know. I mean, maybe, you know, I don't want to insult people looking at their phones. It's not meant to be that. But I like this so much that it's just one of those things when you do, you kind of want to share it and hope that other people pick up on it. Maybe people get into I don't know, I just feel like art is not as like it was 10, even 20 years ago. It just seems like it's kind of been lost a little bit. And it'd be nice to bring that more into popularity again. And as you can see here in just a very short period of time, as we've been talking, that created a nice little scene here. Maybe we could put a couple birds up in there. But again, water control, just practice. You know, a little more water in the back when you're doing your skies to diffuse things. Things that are going to be distant that you want to blend, more water on the brush. If you're doing something in this area and you see water running down, well, then you've got way too much water on your brush. So that's what you want to practice on, really. Because that's going to be the hardest thing, is knowing how much water to get on your brush and when to use that's why it's watercolor. That's why it's one of the hardest mediums, I've been told, to master, because it's that water control, that amount of water. If you're using oil paint, I mean, you can use a little thinner, but there's no question as to the dilution. That's what makes watercolor so unique, and every painting different, because there's the amount of water changes each time, and there's just so many variations to it. It's a real challenge. If you like challenges and you get into things, then this is the medium for you. So that's it. I think I've covered enough. If I left anything out, somebody tell me and I'll cover it in another video. Water control. That was sort of the view of this video. Thanks everybody for watching. Please comment and subscribe.